The cafe was small but warm, tucked between tall buildings on a busy street. Its windows were foggy from the heat inside, and the smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the air. The chatter of customers mixed with the soft clatter of cups and plates. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved quickly, carrying plates, wiping tables, and trying to keep a polite smile on her face. Every day was hard, but she had grown used to the rhythm of her work. Even when her feet ached and her back protested, she reminded herself that this job, small and tiring as it was, helped keep her family fed and a roof over her head. It was a weekday afternoon, usually quiet, but the cafe still had a few regulars scattered around. The waitress had just finished wiping one table when her eyes fell on a small figure sitting alone in the corner. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, with big, curious eyes that seemed too sad for someone so young. She was drawing quietly in a notebook, occasionally glancing at the people passing by. Something about her looked lonely, like she had been left out of the world around her. The waitress hesitated for a moment. She had seen many children in the cafe before, some noisy and excited, others shy and quiet. But there was something different about this child. She seemed fragile, like a small bird that needed gentle handling. The waitress took a deep breath and approached her table. "Hello?" she said softly, forcing a smile. "Are you waiting for someone?" The little girl shook her head. "No, I'm just sitting." Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but polite. The waitress nodded, trying not to stare too much. "Would you like some water or juice while you sit?" The girl hesitated for a moment before nodding slightly. The waitress went to fetch a small glass of juice and returned with it carefully. She placed it on the table with a warm smile. "Here you go," she said. "I'm always around if you need anything." The child looked up at her with wide eyes, then back down at her drawing. She didn't speak much, but her shy glance seemed to say thank you. The waitress lingered for a moment, then returned to her work. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the little girl. There was something unusual about the child's quiet presence. Most children at this age were full of chatter, asking questions and seeking attention. But this one, she seemed to carry a world of thoughts on her small shoulders. As the afternoon moved on, the cafe began to empty. The waitress found herself walking past the little girl again and decided to sit down for a few minutes. She leaned on the edge of the table, keeping her voice gentle. "What are you drawing?" she asked. The child lifted her notebook a little and showed a simple sketch of a house surrounded by trees in a small garden. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear and thoughtful. "I like houses," the child said softly. "They make me feel safe," the waitress nodded. "I understand that. A home can be a very special place." There was a pause, and the child looked up at her with something like curiosity in her eyes. "Do you like your home?" The waitress smiled faintly. "I do, even if it's not fancy. It's where my family is, and that's what matters most." The girl nodded thoughtfully, then went back to her drawing. The waitress stayed for a while, just watching her quietly. There was a calmness in the child's presence that made her heart ache a little. She remembered being a child herself, sometimes lonely and wishing for someone to notice her. She wanted to offer a little comfort, even in such a small way. Over the next few days, the child kept returning to the cafe. Each time, the waitress noticed her, greeted her warmly, and sometimes sat down to chat. Slowly, a pattern began to form. The child would draw quietly at her table, and the waitress would find ways to engage her gently, asking about her sketches, telling small stories, or just listening to her thoughts. The girl didn't speak much about her life, but through her drawings and small words, the waitress sensed that she had a lot of feelings that needed attention. One rainy afternoon, the child looked especially sad. Her eyes were clouded with a weight that even her drawings couldn't hide. The waitress noticed immediately. She knelt down beside the table and whispered, "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I'm here with you." The little girl hesitated, then let out a small sigh. I wish someone would notice me," she admitted quietly. The waitress's heart softened. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to want someone's attention and care. She reached out gently and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "I notice you, and I'm here for you. You're not alone." For the first time, the child's lips curved into a small, shy smile. It was fragile but real. The waitress smiled back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the cafe's heater. In that moment, she realized that even small gestures like sitting down, listening, offering kindness, could mean the world to someone who felt invisible. Days passed, and their bond grew. The child would look forward to seeing the waitress, and the waitress began to feel a protective fondness for her. It was a strange friendship, formed not out of shared wealth or status, but out of simple human connection. The little girl never demanded anything, yet her presence brought a quiet joy to the waitress's life. One afternoon, as the child was drawing in her notebook, she looked up and asked, "Do you have a family?" The waitress shook her head gently. "I do, but they live far away. I miss them sometimes." The child tilted her head. "I think it must be hard not having someone around." The waitress nodded. "It is, but talking to you makes things a little better." She smiled warmly. "You've helped me more than you know." The girl's smile widened slightly, though still shy. There was a trust forming between them, a bond that needed no explanation. The waitress felt a sense of purpose in this connection, a reminder that kindness and attention could reach even the smallest, quietest hearts. Little did the waitress know, the child she had been spending time with was far from ordinary. There was something about her calm demeanor, her gentle manners, and the hints of a life lived differently from most children, that hinted at a world the waitress could never imagine. But for now, all that mattered was the little moments, a smile, a laugh, a shared story, and the comfort of being noticed and cared for. And so, the cafe, once just a place of work, began to feel different. It became a space where two lonely souls, separated by age and experience, found a simple connection that made the long hours and quiet days more bearable. The waitress, tired from her shifts and the weight of her responsibilities, found a spark of joy in the child's presence. And the child, who had spent so much time feeling invisible, began to understand the warmth of friendship, of someone truly seeing her for who she was. It was a small beginning, a single thread of human connection in a world that often overlooked such quiet moments. But in that thread, both the waitress and the child found a reason to hope, a reason to smile, and a reason to keep coming back to the small, warm cafe on the busy street. The waitress didn't know it yet, but this child's life was tied to a world of unimaginable wealth, a world that contrasted sharply with her own struggles. And yet, for these afternoons in the cafe, none of that mattered. They were just two people, sharing small moments of kindness, learning to trust and care for one another in a simple human way. The little girl looked up one last time as the waitress left for the day. "Thank you," she whispered. The waitress paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "Anytime," she said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." And with that promise, a small bond was formed, one that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the small bond between the waitress and the little girl grew stronger with each passing afternoon. The cafe, once just a place to serve food and clean tables, became a quiet refuge for both of them. The little girl arrived regularly, her footsteps soft and almost hesitant, yet her eyes brightened the moment she spotted the waitress moving between tables. The waitress noticed it too. She had been tired when she first started to sit with the child, thinking it would be a few minutes of simple conversation. But now these moments had become something she looked forward to, something that filled her long, exhausting days with unexpected warmth. Even as the cafe hummed with activity, the corners of her heart had space reserved just for the child. The girl, though shy and quiet, had started to share small pieces of her life. She spoke in soft, careful words, but the stories revealed more than she probably realized. She told the waitress about her mornings, the quiet walks to school, the library where she liked to sit and read. She spoke of empty afternoons in a big house where the rooms were vast, but loneliness filled the corners. Sometimes, she whispered her thoughts like secrets too small to shout, and the waitress listened with patience and care. "Do you have friends at school?" the waitress asked one afternoon, balancing a tray with drinks. The girl shook her head slowly. "Not really, I like to be by myself. Most kids are loud. They don't understand quiet." Her voice was almost lost beneath the soft music playing in the cafe, but the waitress leaned in, giving her full attention. "I understand," she said. "Being quiet isn't a bad thing. It just means you notice things others don't." The girl's lips curved into a small smile. It wasn't a wide smile, but it was genuine, and the waitress felt a small thrill in her chest. She realized that these afternoons were giving the child something more than just company. They were giving her a safe place to be herself. And for the waitress, This friendship was slowly melting away the fatigue and stress she carried from long days and endless chores. One rainy afternoon, the streets outside the cafe were slick with water, and the gray sky pressed down on the city. The girl came in, shaking off her small umbrella, and the waitress noticed her looking even quieter than usual. Something in her eyes hinted at sadness, but also a desire to connect. "Would you like to sit somewhere warm?" the waitress asked gently, guiding her to a table by the window. The girl nodded, clutching her notebook to her chest. She often drew when she was upset, and the waitress had learned to respect this silent outlet. She brought over a small cup of cocoa, still steaming, and placed it carefully in front of her. "Here," she said softly. "This should help a little." The girl's fingers trembled as she held the cup. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but the waitress could hear the gratitude in it. They sat together in silence for a few moments, listening to the soft patter of rain against the window. The waitress didn't rush to speak. Sometimes just being present was enough. Then, the little girl opened her notebook and began to draw. Curious, the waitress leaned over slightly. "What are you drawing today?" she asked. The girl's pencil moved quickly, sketching shapes and lines that slowly formed into the figure of a house. But it wasn't just any house. It was grand and detailed with tall windows, a long driveway and flowers along the edges. Yet something about it felt empty, as though the artist had poured her longing into the walls and roof. I like big houses," the girl said softly, almost as if she had spoken aloud by accident. "They look safe. But sometimes even big houses are lonely." The waitress's chest tightened. She had lived in small, crowded apartments, and she understood the idea of a home that didn't feel like a home. She reached out and placed a hand lightly over the girl's. "It's not the size of the house that matters," she said. "It's the people inside it and the care you give to the place. That's what makes it feel warm." The girl looked at her, eyes wide. "But I don't have anyone," she whispered. The waitress shook her head gently. "You have me, at least. And I promise to be here whenever you need someone." Something changed in the girl's expression that day. She'd been carrying a quiet weight, a sadness she hadn't been able to name. But the waitress's words, gentle and steady, created a small crack in that weight. For the first time in a long time, the girl seemed to believe that someone outside her world cared about her well-being. Over the next few weeks, the two of them developed small routines. The girl would arrive at the cafe and immediately head to her favorite corner. The waitress would bring a drink and sometimes a small snack, things she could afford even on her tight budget. They would sit together, drawing, chatting about small things, or sharing stories from their lives. Sometimes the girl would talk about her favorite books or the animals she imagined living in the garden of the house she drew. Other times they would simply sit in comfortable silence, letting the soft hum of the cafe fill the space between them. The waitress began to notice little details about the girl that no one else seemed to see. She noticed how the child's eyes sparkled when she discovered something new in a book, how her lips quivered slightly when she felt unsure, and how she wrinkled her nose in concentration when sketching. Each detail was a small window into her inner world, a world that was lonely but rich with imagination. One afternoon, the girl finally spoke of her father. Her voice was hesitant, almost careful, as if she had been practicing the words in her head. "My dad, he's very busy," she said softly. "He doesn't have much time for me." The waitress nodded. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made her heart ache. "That must be hard," she said gently. The girl looked down at her drawing. "Sometimes I feel like he doesn't even notice me. He's everywhere else but not here." Her voice cracked slightly, but the waitress reached over and squeezed her hand. "I hear you," she said. "And I see you. You're not alone when I'm around, and I will always listen to you." The girl's eyes shimmered with a small, fragile light. She had longed for someone to notice her, to care without judgment, and the waitress offered exactly that. Over time, the child's trust grew, and she began sharing more than just her drawings and brief stories. She spoke about school, about what made her laugh, and even the small dreams she harbored quietly, like wanting to grow flowers in a garden one day. The waitress, in turn, shared gentle stories from her own life, not her hardships, but little moments that made her smile. She told stories about small acts of kindness she had received from strangers, about the simple joys of cooking a good meal or watching the sun set after a long day. She never spoke of wealth or fame, only the small, human experiences that everyone could understand. Through these afternoons together, the waitress began to see the child not as a lonely girl, but as a young soul full of imagination and potential. She started to understand that the child's quiet demeanor was not weakness, but a sign of sensitivity, and she realized that even someone with very little could make a big difference in a child's life, simply through attention, kindness, and genuine care. One day, as the girl was drawing a large garden surrounding the house she imagined, she looked up at the waitress with a question. "Do you think someone can care about me even if they are busy?" The waitress smiled, her heart full. "Of course," she said. "People care in many ways. Sometimes they show it by being there in person, sometimes by thinking of you, and sometimes by listening when you need someone to hear you. And right now I care. I'm here. And I will be." The girl's small smile that day lingered longer than usual. There was a warmth in her eyes, a glimmer of hope that the waitress had never seen before. It was the first time the child seemed to believe that someone genuinely valued her presence, not for what she had, but for who she was. Weeks turned into months, and their connection became stronger. The child began to look forward to her afternoons at the cafe, and the waitress looked forward to seeing her. They shared small victories together: a new drawing completed, a funny story at school, a new book discovered, and celebrated these simple joys with quiet smiles and soft laughter. Even the regular customers began to notice the gentle friendship forming in the corner. Some offered quiet smiles when they saw the girl drawing. Others nodded at the waitress with subtle approval. But the two of them never needed recognition from anyone else. Their bond existed in the small everyday moments, the gentle smiles, the shared cocoa, the whispered words of comfort, and the safe space created between them. Little did the waitress know, the child's life was far more complicated than she could imagine. Though the girl appeared quiet and reserved, and though her loneliness was clear, she carried the weight of a world that few could see. A world of luxury, privilege, and responsibilities far beyond her years. But for these afternoons in the cafe, none of that mattered. Here she was just a child, allowed to be herself, to be noticed, and to feel valued. And for the waitress, these moments brought a new sense of purpose. Though her life was filled with challenges and hardships, she realized that her kindness could change someone's life, even in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The child's trust and openness reminded her of the power of simple human connection, a power that could bridge gaps of age, experience, and even social status. As the sun set one evening, casting a golden glow through the cafe windows, the waitress watched the girl packing up her notebook. The child looked up at her, eyes bright and hopeful. "See you tomorrow?" she asked softly. The waitress nodded, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Of course," she said. "I'll be here." And in that small, quiet exchange, their friendship continued to grow. A bond formed not out of wealth or circumstance, but out of attention, care, and the simple act of being present for someone who needed it most. The afternoons at the cafe had grown into a small, comforting routine. The little girl would arrive after school, clutching her notebook and her small bag, and the waitress would always be ready with a warm smile and a drink. Each meeting was quiet, full of drawings, soft conversation, and gentle encouragement. But that day something was different. The cafe was busier than usual, filled with the hum of conversations, the clatter of plates, and the occasional laugh of customers. The little girl arrived, as always, and slipped into her favorite corner, pulling out her notebook. The waitress approached with her usual tray, carrying a small cup of cocoa and a plate of cookies. "Hello," she said warmly. "Busy day today?" The girl nodded, her eyes downcast. "A little," she murmured. As the waitress set the tray down, the door of the cafe opened with a chime and a man walked in. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. His clothes were expensive-looking, but his expression was soft and gentle as he scanned the cafe. He paused when his eyes fell on the little girl sitting quietly in the corner. The girl looked up and smiled faintly. She waved slightly and the man's face lit up with warmth. He hurried over to her table, his steps quick but careful, as if he didn't want to disturb the delicate moment between the child and the waitress. "Hello, sweetheart," he said in a calm, kind voice. "I didn't know you'd be here today." The little girl's smile widened slightly. "I came to draw," she said softly, her voice still quiet but filled with a touch of excitement. The waitress, standing a few feet away, froze. She watched as the man knelt slightly to speak with the girl at her level, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. There was something familiar about his manner, something that spoke of wealth and influence but also of genuine care. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that this child, whom she had grown so close to, was not ordinary. The girl introduced the man simply. "This is my dad," she said, and the waitress's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected that the child's life was different, but she had never imagined this. The father's presence radiated a quiet power, and yet there was a tenderness in his eyes that immediately reassured her. The waitress tried to keep her composure, forcing a polite smile as she approached the table. "It's nice to meet you," she said softly. The man looked up at her, his eyes sharp but kind. "And you must be the one who has been keeping my daughter company," he said. His voice was smooth and steady, carrying a hint of gratitude. "I've heard about you." The waitress blinked, unsure how to respond. She had never expected her small acts of kindness to be noticed by anyone outside this little world she shared with the child. I just spend time with her," she said humbly. "She's a sweet girl and I wanted to make her afternoons a little brighter." The father nodded slowly, his gaze moving between the waitress and his daughter. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "It's not easy for a child when their parent is busy. You've given her something she really needed." The little girl, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, glanced at the waitress. "I like it when she's here," she said softly. "She talks to me and listens. She makes me happy." The waitress felt her chest tighten. She had never thought her presence could matter so much, but hearing it directly from the child filled her with a quiet pride. "I'm glad," she said. "That's all I want, to see you smile." The father smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You've done more than you realize," he said. "Sometimes the little things mean the most. Even for someone who has everything, the smallest act of kindness can change a life." The waitress nodded, feeling a mixture of awe and nervousness. She had grown up in a world far removed from this one, where money was scarce and opportunities were limited. Standing here in the presence of a man whose wealth and influence were beyond her imagination, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could someone like her truly be part of this child's world? But as she looked at the little girl's face lit with a small, hopeful smile, the doubt faded. It didn't matter who she was or where she came from. What mattered was the bond she had formed, the trust and comfort she had provided. In that moment, she realized that genuine care and attention were more valuable than any wealth or status. The father, noticing her hesitation, spoke again. "I know this might feel strange," he said softly, "but please know that your presence here is appreciated. You've given my daughter something that I couldn't always provide: your time, your attention, and your kindness." The waitress swallowed hard, nodding. I just want her to be happy," she said. "That's all." The little girl looked between the two adults, her eyes shining with a mix of emotions. She felt a strange warmth at having both people she cared about in the same space. For the first time, she realized that she didn't have to choose between worlds. She could enjoy the love and attention of her father, and still cherish the friendship she had found with the waitress. Over the next few minutes, the father stayed nearby, watching the child as she shared her drawing with the waitress. He asked questions gently, showing interest in the sketches and the stories behind them. The waitress explained the details, describing how the child imagined gardens and houses, and how she poured her feelings into each line and shape. The father listened carefully, nodding with genuine interest. "She has an incredible imagination," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "It's rare to see a child so thoughtful and creative." The waitress smiled. "She's also very kind," she said. She notices things that others often miss, and she cares deeply about the world around her. The little girl blushed, hiding her face behind her notebook for a moment. She wasn't used to receiving such praise, especially in front of her father. But the warmth in the cafe and the gentle encouragement from both adults made her feel safe. As the afternoon wore on, the waitress and the father began to talk quietly, sharing small details about the child's routine, her favorite activities, and the moments that brought her joy. The conversation was careful, respectful, and full of mutual understanding. The father was grateful for the waitress's presence, realizing that she had been filling a gap he couldn't always attend to. For the waitress, this interaction was overwhelming, yet inspiring. She had never imagined that her small acts of kindness could be recognized by someone of such stature. But more than that, she saw the genuine impact she had on the child's life. The realization was both humbling and empowering. She had made a real difference simply by being present and caring. The little girl, sensing the new dynamic, began to speak more freely. She shared small stories about her school, her favorite books, and the quiet walks she liked to take. The father listened with patience, occasionally interjecting with gentle questions or soft laughter. The waitress noticed how the child's demeanor changed in the presence of both adults. She seemed lighter, more open and more confident. At one point, the father excused himself briefly, leaving the waitress and the child alone. The girl looked up, her eyes filled with curiosity and excitement. "Do you think he really cares?" she asked softly. The waitress nodded, smiling. "I do," she said. "Even busy people care in their own ways. Sometimes it just takes a little time for them to show it." The girl looked thoughtful, her small fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. "I hope so," she whispered. "I really do." The waitress reached out and placed a hand gently over hers. "He does," she reassured her. "And you've done something important too. You've shown him what it means to be seen, to be understood. That's a gift, just like the one you've given me." The child smiled softly, a quiet understanding passing between them. In that moment, the bond they shared felt even stronger. It wasn't just a friendship anymore. It was a connection built on trust, care, and the recognition of each other's value. When the father returned, he noticed the gentle exchange and smiled. "I see you two have become quite the team," he said lightly, though his eyes were warm with appreciation. The waitress felt a small surge of pride, but remained humble. "We just care about each other," she said softly. "That's all." The father nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He realized that this simple friendship, born in a small cafe on quiet afternoons, was something rare and valuable. It was a bridge between worlds, between wealth and struggle, between adulthood and childhood, between loneliness and genuine connection. As the afternoon drew to a close, the little girl packed up her things, her notebook filled with drawings and stories. She looked at the waitress and her father, a mixture of happiness and relief on her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." The waitress smiled, her heart full. "Anytime," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow." The father nodded, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "And I'll make more time for you too," he said quietly. "I promise." In that moment, the waitress realized something profound. Her simple acts of kindness had created ripples far beyond what she could see. She had not only brought joy and comfort to a lonely child, but had also touched the life of someone powerful, reminding him of the importance of presence, attention, and love. And as they left the cafe, walking out into the soft glow of the setting sun, the waitress felt a quiet satisfaction. She had learned that no act of care was too small, no moment of attention wasted. Sometimes the smallest gestures could change lives forever. Little did she know this was only the beginning. The bond she had formed with the child and the growing understanding with the father would soon bring challenges, surprises, and life-changing moments she could never have imagined. After the first meeting with the little girl's father, the cafe felt different. The waitress noticed it in the way the child seemed lighter, more at ease, and even more willing to share her thoughts and dreams. The afternoons were no longer just quiet moments of drawing and soft conversation. They became something richer, a bridge between two worlds that normally would have had nothing to do with each other. The father began visiting the cafe occasionally. He didn't stay long at first, always polite and careful, making sure not to disturb the fragile rhythm of the little girl's afternoons. But his presence brought a subtle shift. The child would light up when she saw him, and the waitress could see the quiet joy that had been missing in her life for so long. The little girl's laughter began to come more freely, small giggles that felt like tiny sparks of sunlight in the cafe's warm atmosphere. The waitress, at first, felt a strange mix of awe and nervousness. She was still the same person who had walked in every day, serving coffee, clearing tables, and struggling to make ends meet. Now she was part of something far bigger than herself, part of a child's world that included wealth and influence she had never imagined. But she reminded herself that none of that mattered in the quiet moments she shared with the child. What mattered was the trust they had built, and the kindness they offered each other. One afternoon, as rain drizzled lightly outside, the child arrived with her notebook tucked carefully under her arm. She looked up at the waitress and smiled shyly. "Can we draw today?" she asked softly. "Of course," the waitress said warmly. "I've been looking forward to it." As the girl opened her notebook, the father appeared at the door holding an umbrella and looking a little tired from a long day. The child's eyes lit up at the sight of him, and the waitress watched as their bond quietly unfolded. She realized how important these moments were, not just for the child but also for the father, who clearly valued these small pockets of time with his daughter. The father joined them at the table, keeping his voice low and calm. "What are we drawing today?" he asked, curious. The little girl held up her pencil. "I want to draw a garden," she said. "A big one with flowers and trees and a place where I can hide and play." The waitress nodded, smiling. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Gardens are full of life and imagination." As the child drew, the father watched quietly, asking gentle questions about her choices of flowers and colors. The waitress noticed how attentive he was, and she felt a small sense of relief. Though he was often busy, he clearly wanted to connect with his daughter in meaningful ways. Over the next few weeks, this became their new routine. The father would sometimes appear unexpectedly, surprising the little girl with a small gesture, a hand-drawn flower, a chocolate, or even a funny story about his own childhood. The child would beam with happiness, and the waitress would smile quietly, knowing that her small role in the child's life had opened a door to these moments of warmth. But it wasn't always easy. There were days when the father had to leave abruptly, pulled away by work commitments or urgent meetings. The little girl would watch him go, her small shoulders drooping, and the waitress would gently comfort her. "He cares," she would say softly. "Even if he's busy, he loves you." The child nodded, but the waitress could see the longing in her eyes. It was a quiet reminder that love was not always about presence. Sometimes it was about consistency, patience, and trust. And so, the waitress made a point of being there whenever she could, showing the child that someone's attention and care could be counted on, even when the father was away. One day, the father asked to speak with the waitress privately. They stepped into a quiet corner of the cafe, and he looked at her with genuine sincerity. "I want to thank you," he said, "for being here for her, for listening, for caring, for giving her something I haven't always been able to give." The waitress shook her head gently. "I'm just a friend," she said softly. "I want her to be happy, that's all." The father smiled. "That's exactly what makes this important. You've given her a sense of security, of being seen and understood. That's priceless." The waitress felt a lump in her throat. She had never thought of her small gestures as anything extraordinary, but hearing it acknowledged by someone like him made her heart swell. I want to help," she said quietly. "You already have," he said, "and I want you to know that your presence here matters, not just for her, but for me too. You remind me what's important." The waitress nodded, a soft smile on her face. It was a strange, humbling moment. She was a simple woman from a modest background, yet she was having a profound impact on the life of a little girl, and even on the life of the girl's father. She realized that kindness and attention were forms of wealth far greater than money. In the following weeks, the bond between the three of them grew stronger. The child began to trust that both adults cared deeply for her, each in their own way. She would talk about her dreams, her small adventures at school, and even the little fears she held quietly in her heart. The father listened patiently, sometimes offering advice, sometimes just acknowledging her feelings with a gentle nod or a warm smile. The waitress, meanwhile, offered comfort, encouragement, and guidance in ways that felt personal and genuine. One afternoon, as the father watched the little girl explaining her drawing, He realized that her imagination and sensitivity had been nurtured in ways he had never expected. "You've done something amazing," he said to the waitress quietly. "You've helped her grow." The waitress shook her head humbly. "I just spent time with her," she said. "She's amazing on her own." The father nodded, understanding the truth in her words. The child's happiness was the result of a combination of love, attention, and care from both adults. It was a delicate balance, but one that was slowly transforming her life. The child began to share small victories with them: the completion of a new drawing, a kind word from a classmate, a story she had written about her imaginary garden. The waitress celebrated each achievement quietly, while the father offered gentle praise and encouragement. Together they created a world where the child felt valued, heard, and safe. There were moments of quiet reflection, too. The waitress sometimes watched the little girl and her father from across the table, marveling at the delicate balance they were creating. She thought about her own life, filled with hard work and struggles, and realized that her small acts of kindness had brought about something extraordinary. It wasn't wealth, fame, or recognition. It was the simple human connection that could change lives in ways no money ever could. The father, too, began to understand the importance of presence. He saw how his daughter's happiness depended not just on the gifts he could give or the opportunities he could provide, but on the simple moments of attention, conversation, and care. The waitress had shown him a different kind of wealth, the kind measured in smiles, trust, and quiet confidence. One evening, as the cafe was closing, the three of them sat together, the little girl finishing the last page of her notebook. She looked up at both adults, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening, for caring, for everything." The waitress smiled, reaching out to gently touch the child's hand. "You're welcome," she said softly. "I'm happy to be here for you." The father placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a small squeeze. "And I promise to be here more too," he said quietly. "I've realized that what matters most can't be bought or planned. It has to be felt and shared." The little girl beamed at them both. For the first time, she felt fully seen and understood, surrounded by the warmth and care of two people who truly mattered in her life. She realized that love and attention were not about wealth or status. They were about presence, patience, and trust. For the waitress, this was a transformative moment. She had started with nothing more than a desire to comfort a lonely child, and now she had become an integral part of a life filled with love, growth, and understanding. She understood that her small acts of kindness had opened a door to something extraordinary, a world where her presence mattered, where her care had tangible impact, and where human connection proved more powerful than anything else. As the night fell and the lights in the cafe dimmed, the three of them stepped outside together, laughing softly as they walked in the cool evening air. The little girl held her notebook tightly. The father gently held her hand, and the waitress walked beside them, feeling a sense of purpose and fulfillment she had never known before. This was more than a friendship now. It was a bond that had transformed all their lives. It was proof that even in a world divided by wealth, background, and circumstances, human connection could bridge the gap, heal loneliness, and bring genuine joy. And as they went their separate ways that evening, each carrying the warmth of the moments they had shared, the waitress knew something deep in her heart. This was only the beginning. There would be challenges, surprises, and moments that tested their bond, but the foundation of care, trust, and love they had built was strong enough to carry them forward. In a quiet corner of the city, in a small cafe filled with the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread, a simple act of kindness had begun a journey, one that would forever change the lives of a little girl, her father, and the waitress who had opened her heart. Time passed, and the bond between the little girl, her father, and the waitress grew stronger. What had begun as quiet afternoons in a small cafe had now blossomed into a meaningful connection that touched each of their lives deeply. The little girl no longer seemed lonely. Her eyes sparkled more often, her laughter came easily, and her drawings were full of imagination, filled with gardens, houses, and happy moments. She carried a quiet confidence, knowing she was truly seen and cared for by the two people who mattered most in her life. The waitress had become an important part of that world. She still worked her long hours at the cafe, still wiped tables and served coffee to busy customers, but her days now had a new lightness. She had found purpose beyond herself, a reason to keep going even when the days were tiring. She realized that her small acts of kindness had created something extraordinary, a bridge between lives that seemed worlds apart. The father, too, began to change. He had always been busy, always moving from one meeting to another, one responsibility to the next. Wealth and influence had surrounded him, but they had not filled the gaps left by his absence. Now, seeing the joy his daughter experienced, he understood that presence mattered far more than anything money could buy. He began to prioritize moments with her, small pockets of time that allowed him to connect, to listen, and to simply be there. One afternoon, as the sun cast warm light through the cafe windows, the three of them sat together sharing cocoa and cookies. The little girl was drawing a new picture, this time of a small garden with flowers and a treehouse. She looked up at the waitress and said softly, "I wish every day could be like this." The waitress smiled warmly. "You can make it that way in little pieces," she said. "Even if life is busy, you can carry happiness with you and share it with others." The father nodded, placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. "And I'll be here for you too," he said. "Every time I can." The little girl beamed, her eyes bright. She felt safe, loved, and valued in a way she had never known before. The waitress watched them, a quiet happiness settling in her chest. She realized that these moments, simple, ordinary moments of connection, were the ones that mattered most in life. As weeks passed, the relationship between the three of them deepened. The father began to see the waitress not just as someone who spent time with his daughter, but as a person of extraordinary character. Her kindness, patience, and genuine care had touched his child's life in ways he could never have anticipated. He began inviting her to small family outings, giving her a place in their world that was filled with warmth rather than wealth. The little girl thrived in this environment. She shared stories from school, showed new drawings, and even started helping the waitress with little tasks in the cafe when she could. It became a shared rhythm, a gentle flow of care and affection that nourished all three of them. Each moment reinforced the lesson that love, attention, and kindness were far more valuable than money or material gifts. One day, the father asked the waitress to sit with him in a quiet corner of the cafe. "I want to thank you properly," he said, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. "You've done something remarkable for my daughter. You've given her what I couldn't always provide: time, understanding, and friendship. I want you to know that it has not gone unnoticed." The waitress shook her head softly, humility in her expression. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just listened, spent time with her. I cared." "And that is exactly why it is special," he replied. "Sometimes caring is the greatest gift anyone can give. You've shown her and me that love doesn't depend on wealth, status, or power. It depends on attention, patience, and the willingness to be there when it matters most." The waitress felt a lump in her throat. She had never imagined that her simple kindness could mean so much. She realized that her life, though modest and challenging, had created ripples that reached far beyond what she could see. She had changed a life, and in turn, she herself had been changed. As the days turned into months, the little girl's world continued to expand. She learned to trust in the consistency of love and attention. She began to open up more at school, showing courage in small ways that she had never known before. The father saw these changes and felt a deep sense of pride, not for what he had provided materially, but for the emotional growth and happiness his daughter now enjoyed. The waitress also noticed changes in herself. She walked with a quieter confidence, a subtle joy in her heart that had nothing to do with money or status. She had discovered the power of human connection and the impact of her presence. She had learned that even someone with limited resources could make a profound difference in the life of another human being. One evening, after the cafe had closed and the streets were quiet, the father invited the waitress and his daughter to a small walk nearby. They strolled slowly, talking about dreams, favorite places, and the little adventures they hoped to have together. The little girl laughed freely, holding the waitress's hand as they walked. The father looked on, a gentle smile on his face, and realized that these simple moments were now the memories he would treasure most. The waitress felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she walked alongside them. She knew that she had helped create a safe, nurturing environment for the child, a place where she could feel valued and loved. And she realized that she, too, had been nurtured by this connection, gaining purpose, confidence, and a profound sense of belonging. One day, as the little girl finished another drawing of her imagined garden, she looked up at both adults with wide, shining eyes. "I'm happy," she said simply. "I really am." The waitress smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I'm happy too," she said. "Happiness grows when we share it with others." The father nodded, gently ruffling her hair. "And I'm proud of you," he said. "You've learned that love isn't about things, it's about caring, trusting, and being there for each other. That's the most important lesson in life." The little girl hugged both of them tightly, a rare and precious gesture. In that embrace, all the loneliness, uncertainty, and quiet longing of the past seemed to melt away. She felt seen, valued, and deeply loved, a gift that no wealth or material possession could ever provide. For the waitress, that hug was a culmination of months of care, attention, and patience. She had started as a simple observer, offering small kindnesses to a lonely child, and had become an integral part of a family's emotional landscape. She realized that even in the simplest of acts, sitting quietly, listening, offering encouragement, there was the power to transform lives. The father, watching them together, felt a quiet gratitude. He had wealth beyond imagination, yet he had learned a lesson that no money could teach: the value of presence, empathy, and genuine care. The waitress had shown him how to connect with his child in ways he had overlooked, and in doing so, had enriched all of their lives. In the weeks that followed, the trio continued to spend time together. They shared small adventures outside the cafe, went on short trips to parks and gardens, and enjoyed quiet moments at home. The little girl thrived, growing in confidence, happiness, and creativity. The father learned to balance his responsibilities with meaningful time for his daughter. And the waitress, once an ordinary worker in a small cafe, found herself part of a family she had never expected to belong to. Through it all, one truth became clear: human connection, care, and kindness have a transformative power that cannot be measured in money or material things. A small act of attention, listening, sitting quietly, showing patience, can change lives in ways no one could anticipate. The waitress's presence had provided the little girl with a sense of stability and love, and in turn, had enriched her own life with purpose, joy, and meaning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city glowed in soft evening light, the little girl looked at the waitress and her father. "I feel happy now," she said softly. "Really happy. I didn't know it could feel like this." The waitress smiled, her eyes warm. "It always could," she said gently. "Sometimes it just takes time and the right people to show you." The father nodded, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And we'll always be here for you," he said. "No matter what." The little girl hugged them both again, and in that embrace there was a quiet understanding. She had found love, care, and stability not in things but in people. She had learned that happiness grows from connection, trust, and attention, the gifts that the waitress had given her from the very beginning. And the waitress, watching the two of them, felt a sense of fulfillment she had never imagined. Her simple acts of kindness had grown into something extraordinary. She had helped bridge two worlds, heal loneliness, and create a bond that would last a lifetime. As they walked together into the evening, laughing softly and sharing small stories, the waitress realized that life had a way of rewarding those who give selflessly. She had begun with nothing but a desire to help, and had ended up part of a journey that transformed lives, including her own. In a world often divided by wealth, status, and circumstance, their story became proof that the simplest, most human acts, listening, caring, and showing up, can create bonds that endure, transform, and inspire. And so, in that small cafe, in the soft glow of evening light, a poor waitress, a lonely child, and a busy father discovered the greatest wealth of all: love, trust, and the quiet power of being there for each other. Their lives, forever changed, were now filled with laughter, creativity, and the certainty that kindness, no matter how small, could truly change the world.